Perfect. Thank you and welcome everyone to the Farms Not Factories webinar. I'm your moderator, Marlene Manzo. I'm the Political Leadership Coordinator here at Heal Food Alliance, and I'll be guiding our conversation today. We just want to quickly go through the agenda for today and our conversation because we have some guest speakers with us and we want to get into the I don't want to say meat, but the meat of the conversation, pun not intended. So we're going to start with introductions, which we're doing right now, and we're going to lead into a little bit about our platform toolkit, who we are as Heal, and then we'll lead into a facilitated discussion with our three guests. That should be about 45 minutes, and then we'll go into a Q&A that you all will help us complete with some questions from the audience, and then we'll lead with some actions and things that you can do in your communities or ways that you can support this issue. And that concludes our webinar. We'll be here for about 90 minutes, and that's us. All right, and we have people just coming in and joining, so thank you all who are just jumping on. If you are not familiar with Heal Food Alliance, I just want to share with you all that we are a multiracial, multi-sector alliance of organizations building power to transform our food systems so that they are healthy for our families, accessible for all communities, fair to the people growing our food while protecting our planet. So that's a little bit about who we are. And just to give you context of why we're here, why we're doing this webinar is a part of a series to deepen our shared political analysis, advance a shared narrative, and connect and to unite across sector and geography. So that's our purpose, that's who we are. And I'm gonna pass it on to my teammate Zena to introduce our platform. That gives you a little bit more context about us and our work.
Thank you, Marlene. So to pick up where Marlene left off, this webinar is part of a series of webinars where we're digging into our platform for real food, which is a 10-point platform that serves as a roadmap for Heal's organizing work. And it was crafted by a group of organizations that include Heal members and allies back when Heal was founded. And it continues to guide our work to this day. This particular webinar focuses on the 8th plank of the platform, which is phase out factory farming. We have a few members that are engaged in this work, and today you'll hear from some of them. They're all incredible organizers and are at the front lines of this fight in their communities, so it should be a really interesting conversation. Most of us are aware that factory farming is bad for people, animals, and the planet. But during our time together today, we'll dig a little bit deeper into how much of an issue factory farming is, how it's burdening communities across the US. And we'll also hear about the systems and power dynamics that is perpetuating this practice that is so obviously bad for all of us. And most importantly, we'll hear about the folks resisting this on a grassroots and policy level. Before we start, though, we want to acknowledge that there are land and water-based people all over the world who've lived and continue to live in right relationship with land and animals and our natural environment. Many of these folks hunt or fish, and many grow or farm animals. We know that it's the same mentality of exploitation and extraction that justified land theft and enslavement that justifies seeing animals as commodities and neighboring communities as disposable. So let's remember that. Let's hold all of these complex relationships in our minds as we listen to folks today for the next hour or so. And yeah, with that, I'll pass it back to Marlene to introduce our speakers and get us started.
Thanks so much, Zena. So today you'll hear from some organizers who are confronting confined animal feeding operations, also known as CAFOs, that exemplify probably the worst aspects of our food and farming system, wreaking havoc on the earth, on the health of people and our planet and accelerating climate change. And together they are part of a multifaceted movement to confront this behemoth. And so originally, one of our speakers that we were going to hear from is named Naima Muhammad, a senior advisor and organizing co-director at the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, NCEJN. But unfortunately, Naima had a family emergency and will not be joining us. But just so you get a little bit of who Naima is and why she's so important to this conversation, Naima has been at the front lines of organizing communities dealing with waste from industrial hog operations for over 2 decades. She leads statewide and grassroots efforts for environmental and social justice efforts with NCEJN and serves on the state secretary's Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board. Naima knows firsthand the impact of industrial hog operations on the community and on our local air and water, and we'll really miss hearing from her and all her wisdom and her insight. So we have some resources to share, including a little bit of a documentary trailer from Naima. More importantly, we have 3 other incredible folks on this panel who will speak to how factory farms burden communities. With that, I'll introduce our other speakers today. First, I want to introduce Adam Mason, who is the Senior Manager of Farm Animal Welfare and Environmental Policy at ASPCA. He has worked to fight the expansion of factory farms in his hometown in Iowa and across the US for over 15 years through on-the-ground community organizing, regulatory efforts, and policy advocacy campaigns. Next, we have Noah McDonald, who is a land steward, researcher, and culture keeper coming from 7 generations of rural folk from the upper reaches of the Cape Fear River in North Carolina. Noah's upbringing in rural central Ohio fostered an abiding love for rural people, culture, and landscapes. For Noah, intimate and loving relationship with the land, air, and water is a foundation for good, healthy life. And last but not least, we have Sean Carroll, Policy Director at Land Stewardship Project. And for close to 20 years as an organizer, Sean brings with him experience working on a broad range of social justice issues, including with the labor movement, on environmental issues, in faith communities, on elections, and on food systems. As Policy Director for the Land Stewardship Project, Sean manages a team of organizers building grassroots power. So between them, we're going to talk about the systemic nature of this issue, how we ended up in this place, where CAFOs are at the center of our food system, and we'll hear about the impacts of their power on our communities, on the environment, on our economy, and the democratic process. And lastly, we'll get a chance to talk about what they're doing to fight back and how we can all be part of that fight. All right, so we'll get started with Adam, and I would love to hear from you just to get a little bit about the big picture. So right now you work with ASPCA, but for a long time you also worked in your home state of Iowa, organizing on the issue there. So talk to us about the big picture. Give us a sense of the depth and the scale. What are CAFOs and how did we even get to this place that there's so many of them? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Marlene. So I'm guessing a lot of you are here today because you probably know what a factory farm is, but just in case you don't, if you've seen a factory farm, you know it's a factory farm. If you've seen a factory farm, you've probably smelled that factory farm. Right now, at any given point, there are over 1.6 billion animals being raised for our food, for us here in the US and for export. That amounts to over 10 billion farm animals every year that are raised for food. The majority of those are being raised inside concentrated animal feeding operations. That's what the USDA calls them, right? CAFOs, we call them factory farms because that's what they are. They are designed, these monstrous buildings are designed with the animals to be inputs into the system. That from the time they're born, they're confined inside buildings, suffering the lives of cramped and breathing foul air, generating massive amounts of pollution, over 885 billion pounds of manure every year. And depending on what species and where you are, that manure may look different. If it's poultry operations, obviously it's dry. It can just be piled outside. If it's here in Iowa, it's likely a pit underneath the building where that manure is just there stewing and turning into toxic gases and toxic liquid that gets dumped untreated on our farm fields twice a year. If you're out on the West Coast, it's probably a mega dairy with giant lagoons the size of football fields, or that are, that the industry is now saying they can turn into eco-friendly gas. Well, that's not true, but we'll get to that later. These factory farms are generally signified by corporate ownership. A handful of corporations own the livestock that are in the buildings. They trap the animals inside the buildings. They trap farmers in loads of debt and unfair contracts. They trap our community members inside what many describe as feeling like, when you live next to a factory farm, feeling like a prisoner in your own home. And we got this system of agriculture by design, right? This didn't just happen overnight. It didn't happen just randomly. It happened by design. It started over 40 years ago when people in government, the Secretary of Ag in the 70s, Earl Butz, was going around saying that for agriculture to thrive and survive, you had to get big or get out, right? And since then, what we've seen is regulations watered down. And whether that's environmental regulations that allow this pollution to exist, whether it's animal safety regulations that ensure that animals can continue to be raised in harmful ways, or whether it's worker regulations that continue to allow workers up and down the food chain to be exploited. This system is by design, and it's that vertical integration that has led, again, to a massive amount of power being held in the hands of a few. And I know we're going to speak more about that moving forward.
Great, thanks for that context. So we know that you grew up in Iowa, which has a high concentration of hog farms that are definitely more hogs than people in Iowa. I hear that and I can't believe it. So paint the picture for us. What is it like to live in a place with such a high concentration of factory farms? What are like the real life impacts on day-to-day living?
Yeah. So I grew up in Northwest Iowa in a farming community. And I'm thankful that I got to grow up when I grew up in Northwest Iowa, because that transition in agriculture was happening. We still had some family farms then, but it shifted, right? And you're absolutely right. So just to put it in perspective for folks that aren't familiar with Iowa, there's 3.2, give or take, million people here in Iowa. There's over 26 million hogs alone. Iowa's the #1 hog producing state. We're the #1 egg producing state. We're up there in cows and broilers too, but there are literally millions of animals generating massive amounts of waste that again, like I said before, gets dumped untreated onto our farm fields. But what that looks like is, growing up, and what I got to experience working with community members all across the state for over 15 years was folks who were living in our rural communities, seeing their community literally die. The communities being hollowed out, because as the system of agriculture transitioned into fewer and fewer hands, we saw over the last 40 years a loss of family farmers. With those loss of family farmers, a major economic driver in rural communities went away. That led to small businesses leaving away. And now you go down a main street in a small town in Iowa, over half the shops are boarded up. The communities that are thriving, thankfully, are thriving because of new Iowans, folks who are moving into the state because, again, it's at two sides of the same coin, because they're brought here to work in packing plants, right? While we welcome all Iowans here, we want to see our rural communities flourishing. And unfortunately, the wages that are paid at many of these packing plants aren't livable wages. So, we see workers, again, up and down the food chain trapped in this system. We see farmers losing their livelihoods. We see businesses losing their livelihoods. All the while, the few urban centers that we have here in Iowa continue to grow, but they're paying more and more just to drink clean water. Right now, Iowa has the second largest water treatment facility in the world, and it's running on a day-to-day basis at an additional cost of $10,000 to people who drink water here in Iowa. Now, I wish I could say that Iowa was unique, but unfortunately it's not. And if you look at all of the places where factory farms are concentrated, whether it's pigs here in the Midwest, my neighbors to the north, Sean from LSP, and I know there's some folks from Missouri on the call, whether it's the mega dairies out west or poultry and pigs in the east and south. This issue impacts us all. But we also have to take a look, and I wish Naima was here. I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with Naima for over 12 years, and she can really speak to this, is that obviously when you take a look at the systemic inequities of our society and apply those to our food and farm system, of course, we're going to see those racial inequities amplified by this system. And so when I talk about how rural folks are impacted here in Iowa, I know that that is exacerbated even more when we look at folks in North Carolina and in other states in the South, where the factory farm industry has purposely targeted BIPOC communities to locate these things. And that's infuriating to me. That's what we're up against.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. I'm going to pass it on to Noah. I have a question for you. So you're a livestock manager on a farm that's trying to do the right thing, and part of a movement of land stewards and farmers that are proving that there's a better way to farm animals. So now your farm donates all of its production instead of selling. But can you speak to what it's like for small farmers in your community? How hard is it for them to stay in business and supply to the community at affordable prices? What's it like, and why is that the case for small farmers?
Hi, Marlene. Thank you for that question. Very grateful to be here with y'all. I'm gonna take kind of a circuitous route to answering that question. I currently reside in central Massachusetts, close to the New Hampshire and Vermont border. And yeah, my bio said researcher, so I'm gonna go into a little bit of history real quick. The first small farmers or farmers in this area were the Nipmucks, and they cultivated very large, ecologically integrated, but large fields of corn, beans, squash, pumpkins, sunflowers, and many other crops, as well as hunting, fishing, and gathering. And really, with settlement, that system was intensely disrupted, and specifically with King Philip's War. And what occurred was a settling by the English of this area. And what I've learned recently from living here is that the origins of cattle feedlots are actually here during the colonial era. I was very shocked to learn this. There's a major kind of small farmers rebellion called Shays Rebellion that occurred here in the 1780s. And a lot of them were kind of, you could call like colonial cow-calf producers, I guess. And, you know, they had small cow herds, and there were actually large merchants, London-based merchants and corporate entities that bought these cows and sent them to feedlots in the Connecticut River Valley to fatten and then export to the British West Indies to feed enslaved Africans on the sugar plantations. And I was just absolutely shocked to like learn this stuff about this area. And that's kind of like, so I would say like the roots of CAFOs really stretch back. I mean, also they stretch back to Europe, but they really stretch back to colonial agriculture. Is a claim that I would defend. And I'm gonna skip a whole bunch of time, but up until now, at the present moment, you know, this was a major dairy area. You know, from basically the 19-teens until the 1980s. And there's very few dairy farms here now. There's only two that I can think of in the area, and they're large, with like cow herds, definitely above 40, 50 cows, which doesn't sound like a lot compared to the mega dairy farms out west, but they're very large for here, and the land base here. And yeah, like your question said, I work on a farm where we donate pretty much all of our production. We do beef cattle, turkeys, chickens, hogs, and sheep. And the structure of our farm like could not economically exist if it was for profit. Even in this region of Massachusetts, which arguably is very hospitable to small diversified farming. And it's somewhat of a trap, so to speak. I'll speak from personal experience here. The really only option to maintain a diversified farm like that with, we only have 12 cows, so we don't have a lot of cows. The only way to maintain that as a business would be to sell to the upper class, essentially. It would be it just would be completely economically unfeasible to be able to sell like organic pasture-raised eggs, chickens, beef, pork to actually like working class communities here, of which is predominant in the area actually. And so it's kind of this trap where I had to make this choice where like I really believe strongly in affordable food and a good affordable food, healthy food that's raised on pasture and outdoors and is touched by loving human hands through all the processes of life. And that is unfeasible currently, like in my life. So I'll just leave it there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Noah. All right, and I'm gonna move on to Sean. We have a question for you. So, hi, Sean. How much power do these corporations actually have? Just give us a little bit of a context of how much power it is and what are some of the ways that they wield it?
Yeah. First thing I want to say before I jump in is LSP, Land Stewardship Project, we're a grassroots organization, which means we're led by community members and people of the public who are in the communities where these factory farms exist or trying to exist. And so everything I talk about, everything we know, everything we do is actually led by those community members. They're doing the work. They also deserve the credit. Now, when Adam and Noah were just talking, they were both talking about how this system that we have right now, we created this system. Somebody created this system. It doesn't just exist. And when you look at the system the way it is, and you ask yourself who benefits, you can start to see that a very small amount of people are benefiting and a lot of people are being hurt in a lot of different ways. And that all comes back to power. And there's three types of power. Maybe there might be a lot more types of power. There's three types of power on my mind of how factory farms influence the current system. They use economic power, they use political power, and then they also use cultural power. So economic power. Factory farms, they have consolidated where the money is going in our food and our farm system into a few hands. One quick sort of statistic that will show this. When you look at Minnesota, where I live, we have basically the same amount of cows today as we did 30 years ago, but we've lost almost a third of our farms with cattle. So in 1992, compared 1992 to today, we have 5% less cows, but we have 31% less farms. So we're not doing less farming. It's just happening on smaller farms. And the money is going to a smaller amount of people. And so it's just like Walmart. When Walmart comes into a small town, it can drive out the local shoe store, the local pharmacy, the local grocery store, all of the places that were doing those businesses. Second type of power they yield is political power. Our public policy actually props up factory farms. There's tons of examples of this in Minnesota and several other states. These multi-million gallon manure pits where all this manure is going, tax exempt, property tax exempt in many states. Federal Farm Bill policy is actually giving money and being used, government subsidies, to guarantee loans, to actually put money into these huge manure management systems. So we're actually giving money that way. There's our public policy system is filled with ways that money is flowing to subsidize these large factory farms. And the last point I'll touch on quickly is the cultural power, the ability to influence how people think and how they feel about this issue. If you live in a small town and there's a factory farm coming in, it's hard to stand up and speak up against that. These businesses, while they're controlled by large corporations, it might be people in that community that are trying to expand by thousands and thousands of animals. And people in those communities, if you're running a large business, you have relationships in town, you have influence in town. But we've even seen this, I think it's even gotten probably more extreme even in the last couple of years with the rise of Trumpism and sort of the extremism in our country. Standing up in a small town and speaking out is hard. And so there's lots of different ways that these corporate interests have power over our system. And they've created the system that now exists and benefits them.
Wow, that's a lot. And I thank you, all three of you, for giving us a little bit more context and a little bit of explanation on the work that you're doing and CAFOs altogether. We want to jump into talking a little bit about, the fight, how we can resist. And Sean, I'm going to jump back in with you. And so sticking with you and your description of power that these corporations have, can you describe the current battles that you're in to fight the expansion of factory farms?
Yeah, so kind of thinking about, some of those ways of categorizing sort of the power that our opposition has. We actually have more power in a lot of ways. So when we think about the economic power that factory farms have, an economy that's actually set up to support small and mid-sized farmers is actually a stronger economy, and it's going to build wealth for more people. Even politically, and how broken our political system is, there's vast more people that actually support the system and benefit from the system of small and mid-sized farmers. So we can leverage our democracy to make change that way. And also culturally, there's actually way more people that share our values. Like Adam said, nobody wants to live in a community, smell the air, or have their water polluted by a factory farm. And so LSP, since we've been around, our grassroots members have actually been successful in stopping factory farms 40 times. And because it really comes down to organizing, and organizing works. I believe deeply that the question of stopping factory farms is not about figuring out the right policy. It's just about building enough power. There are lots of policies that can get us there. LSP has worked to create animal unit caps, which puts a cap or a limit on the size of a farm. There's over a dozen counties, cities, townships in Minnesota that have caps like that already. You can look at things around consolidation of monopolies. Factory farms are monopolies. So we have all types of laws around monopolies. We also have laws right now that aren't being enforced around water pollution and air pollution. There's tons of potential policies to stop factory farms. The point is we need to build enough power to actually make that happen. And local organizing works. It's all those 40 victories that I was talking about, there's no secret to them. The secret is that people that were in those communities who were impacted by that problem stood up and stood together to get their decision makers to take action. LSP often works at the local level, at the township level, or the county level. And I'm going to drop in the chat a local organizing toolkit that actually walks folks through examples of policies at the local level that we've pushed for here in Minnesota. But there's also actions that the state or the federal government can do. But what it comes down to is, do you have people that are in that community who can, we don't need to come up with the right message. People that are facing this factory farm know the message that's going to resonate with other people in their community. They know the solutions and the things we're fighting for. And they know what it's going to take to get 50 or 100 people to show up to a meeting and put pressure on their elected officials. So if we can do that local organizing, or we can build the partnerships and alliances in communities that are fighting these battles and these campaigns, we can build enough power to pass the policy that will change our system.
Thanks, Sean. It's like you're preaching to the choir. I'm just like nodding my head. Yes, yes, yes. So I would love to know, and you can share with all of us, what this organizing looks like on the ground. And you talked a little bit about how folks have to come together and outreach with their neighbors and their communities, and communities know what they need and they know best. So can you talk a little bit more about like what that looks like and how you've seen that kind of show up?
Yeah, and we actually have a couple of folks joining our webinar today that have been involved in some of these campaigns for a long time. And if you want to just give them a little shout out in the chat, Tim Ahrens and Malia Hagen Ahrens are two of the folks that have been working in southeastern Minnesota for years to stop a factory farm from coming in there. Won a vote through public education organizing last December, won another vote about a month ago. What their organizing looked like, it was, how do we show that there's overwhelming public support for this? In their county, an animal unit cap's been around for since the late 90s, I believe, but it's been attacked by opponents that want to expand and create a factory farm in this community that would be larger than 98% of the farms in Minnesota. So again, it's back to that idea. Adam mentioned like how many animals are in CAFOs in the system, and a huge amount are, but again, that's a small amount of actual farmers. Right? 98% of the people are actually doing a different model of farming. And so what the organizing looks like, right? It's the hard on the ground work every day of getting people out to meetings, holding rallies, generating phone calls, media, getting in the newspaper, and the values that underlie all that work: trust, shared leadership, working towards a vision. It's that type of, and then I think the last thing I'll say is, is pointing to the solutions. Right. So, what Noah was talking about, the work that's happening with Noah and just thousands and thousands of other farmers. There's nothing more anti-farmer than a factory farm. And there's nothing more pro-farmer than supporting small and mid-sized farms. And that needs to be our message, that we are actually creating, what this is doing is actually creating a system that is pro-farmer, pro-agriculture, and pro-rural communities, pro-small towns.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. And I'm going to jump right back to Adam to talk a little bit more about ASPCA. So ASPCA is known for, what the name stands for, but you all take a really intersectional approach to your work. Can you tell us the ways that you all are organizing to address CAFOs?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Great question. So yeah, as the name implies, ASPCA is an animal welfare organization, but we don't stay in that silo, right? We know that for us to win the food and farm system that we want to see, we have to get out of our own silos. And so what I've been learning since I joined the ASPCA is really all of the different ways that we are organizing. Like you said, and one of those ways actually is an organizational member of the Heal Food Alliance. We believe in these strong partnerships. So what the ASPCA is doing is we work a lot with farmers. We want to see more farmers who are raising animals the right way, right? Just like Sean was saying. And so that means for us, getting welfare certified with a certification that actually means something. It means making sure that we transition farmers out of CAFOs and get them into more humane systems of raising farm animals, whether that's through land access, through mentoring, through certification. It's going to take a lot to transition farmers to the way we want to see animals being raised. A large body of work at the ASPCA has focused actually on corporations and businesses, getting corporations to buy food that is raised more humanely, getting more grocery stores offering those welfare certified options. And building that out. And you can find a resource on our website called Shop with Your Heart. really, and this is both near and dear to my heart, and it's something that we saw especially come to the forefront during the pandemic, is we want to be an organization that supports and allies ourselves with worker-led campaigns, right? And nothing has been more evident around that than the conditions that meat processing workers faced during the pandemic. The meat packers refusing to shut down meat packing operations, keeping workers trapped in unsafe working conditions. I know that's just the tip of the iceberg, and it had always been that bad. But really, seeing kind of the curtain pulled back during the pandemic, just again allows us to paint the picture for folks who care about animal welfare issues, that these same meat packers who are abusing animals are also abusing their workers. And so it's in our common interest to come together in fights that advance all of our issues. And even more recently, climate change is not going away. We know that, right? We've seen the droughts, we've seen the wildfires, we've seen the hurricanes. We're seeing more and more of it. And this system contributes, right? These factory farms are largely driving over 15% of greenhouse gas emissions, causing the planet to continue to warm. So we have to address the environmental and climate damage that this system is causing. And so we want to ally and wage campaigns and wage fights that take on those environmental harms, those climate harms that this system, this factory farm system of raising animals is causing, is driving. We know to do that. We can't do it alone. None of us can. But together, like Sean was saying, we have the power and we have the resources to make the changes we want to see. And so that's just kind of a touch on the work that we're trying to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And it's awesome to see the connections and the parallels between our work and your work. So thank you for sharing on that. I'm going to jump on to speak with Noah. Hey there again, Noah. Hi. Can you see me, Noah? Okay, cool. Here you are. So the fight isn't just about, confronting corporations and policymakers, as, Adam just spoke about. But there are specific things that regenerative animal agriculturalists can do as well and need. So what are some of the important things that farmer organization groups like yours are doing?
Sure, Marlene. So in addition to managing a farm up here, I also work for an organization called Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network. Quite a mouthful, but it's the first Black farmers organization composed of certified organic farmers and producers in the United States. So I kind of really was listening closely with what Sean was explaining about the level of organizing required to stop the construction and expansion of CAFOs. And I think the same level of organizing can be dedicated to the building of the alternative system that can then move to replace CAFOs. And I think what's essential with that is not only financial investment in small and medium-sized farms, but also kind of like a shift in the treatment of the farmer and the shift in treatment of all the people who are involved in the production of food, not just a farmer. And like we've seen, like the land is treated as a commodity. The animal itself is treated as a commodity, but also I think that the human beings actually are also treated as commodities. And I think that, like, specifically from my perspective, working with SAFON, like as an organization, SAFON's really dedicated to not only being like a farm service organization, but actually being in the trenches with farmers themselves and working through like actually very personal issues, because this affects the ability of farmers to implement regenerative practices. And I think like the same level of networks and local organizing and like mass community organizing that's required to stop CAFO is required to build an alternative food economy, essentially, that's composed of producers. I don't want to pigeonhole people, but like producers and community members and processors, and the consciousness raising needs to happen across those areas. And then I think also in terms of farmers themselves, I think the biggest thing is to take inspiration internationally with small farmers movements internationally, like La Via Campesina and its constituent organizations. A lot of our models for farmer organizing are coming internationally, because a lot of governments are much more progressive about dismantling industrial agriculture than the United States. I mean, arguably the United States is the most indebted. So out of like pretty much most countries in the entire world. So mainly thinking about like Cuba, certain organizations in Brazil, and also in Southern Western Africa, I think are really like the inspiration. So I think like to tie it all together, I think it really comes down to like a deep level of community building, community organizing in rural communities to kind of like re-stitch together the wounds that have been created by the industrialization of farming.
Yeah, cool stuff. Thank you. And I just want to kind of loop into this next piece and like the vision part, Noah. And if you could just share what your vision is for healthy, respectful, and regenerative animal agriculture, because we heard a little bit about it in your bio and then a little bit about the work that you do, but if you can just kind of expand on that for us.
Yeah, sure. I think, I mean, my vision, point blank period, would be the elimination of CAFOs as a phenomenon, that they would be phased out as a method of food production in the United States. I think that they represent like the worst, some of like the worst dynamics within agriculture. And yeah, so I would start with that. And then at the same time that efforts are occurring to dismantle that system of food production, I think that the creation of an alternative system is extremely important. And right now, like I was saying earlier, basically the vast majority of people in the United States are shut out from being able to basically access like regeneratively farmed farm products, so to speak. I think that is one of the immediate things that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. And I think that can really only, yeah, I think that community organizing can only go so far. I think that federal interventions like absolutely has to occur. The economic environment needs to be created for an alternative system to grow. And yeah, I would just leave it there. I think that in the deeper future, I think that a decommodification of food, so a decommodification of land, human beings, and like the animals and plants that we eat is extremely essential. And I'm, to be very honest, I think it takes an extreme amount of imagination to figure out what that would look like. And I don't actually have that answer right now. Because yeah, it would require some pretty drastic thinking. But I'll just leave.
Yeah, it reminds me of, when Sean was talking about how politicians or just corporations have that culture power. it requires a lot of culture power to really make that shift, because you're changing mentalities and perspectives, which is the hardest thing to kind of change. So I am going to pass it on to Sean to talk about LSP's vision for a healthy, respectful, and regenerative animal agriculture.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, probably the first place to start is just, I think everybody on this call, everybody on this webinar has thoughts on what the vision is. And ultimately, we need to find a space to create that vision together. I mean, like Noah said, I do believe we will stop factory farming, that world is out there. And it's going to require a transformative change, transformative system change. And so I'm thinking a little bit about the vision of what it's going to create to build that power, the vision of what that change is going to take and look like. I think it goes back to what's been said a few times, what Noah said again, which is creating the vision for what we're for, not just what we're against, investing in the alternative system. We mentioned how our opponents, it's not just the exploitation of animals, it's not just the pollution of our air and our water, it's also the exploitation of workers. The factory farm that I mentioned that Tim and Malia have stopped a few times now, in 2021, they were cited for unpaid wages. So thanks for also polluting our air, our water, and not paying people. So the sort of forms of oppression and extraction of our opponents, they are intersectional in their oppression and their extraction. They're kind of attacking us and our communities in a lot of different ways. And so we need to provide and create and build an alternate system that's also systemic, right? That also looks at wages, that looks at economies, looks at our health, looks at our communities. And at the end of the day, it's like what we're talking about is, do we have a system of farming that is primarily motivated by profit, or do we have a system of farming and a food system that's based on our values? And when you have a system that is ultimately the main goal is profit, you're going to extract. And when you have a system that's based on our values, there's actually, again, pretty consensus that we should all have water to drink. And that's what's at stake here. And right now, we are involved in a lot of campaigns with a lot of people on these calls and a lot of other spaces. And we're involved in campaigns at the local level that will actually have implication for what can happen at the state or the federal level. We're also involved in campaigns at the state and the federal level. And we want to connect with other people on this call. We have lessons to share. We have lessons to learn from you. And ultimately, that's what that vision is going to look like. How do we get there is going to involve being in building the widest, biggest movement possible.
Great. Thank you, Sean. And I think I'm going to bring in Adam for this next question. And I want to hear from you to talk a little bit about other ways that we need to imagine and co-organize our pathways to phasing out CAFOs.
Yeah, thank you, Marlene. So I just I'm feeling so inspired and filled up right now by everything Noah's laying out and Sean's laying out, right? Because I'm hearing so much that resonates. And, even just in that last 5 minutes, the decommodification of food and water, and then Sean talking about the values that we hold, right? And I truly believe that clean water is a human right. And as we see droughts and water shortages and water quality, we see water systems privatized, right? So again, this just it's the tentacles are so amazing. But I think what Sean said initially, one of the things is we know what our messages are, right? We do, because it ties into our values and what we believe and what we know in our hearts. And honestly, we have a lot of the policy solutions. A lot of the stuff that Noah was laying out is we've got the policies there, right? And I've seen a lot in the chat, like Steph and Kelly and folks talking about Food System Reform Act. So we've got the policy solutions. The Food System Reform Act is a perfect example where we could have, if we had the power on Capitol Hill, we could have a moratorium, no more factory farms. And in addition, that bill includes $40 billion to help transition farmers out of factory farms and into pasture-based, welfare certified operations. And we can make sure that we need to do our equity check too, and make sure that as we're doing that, we're not repeating the faults of our past, and that we're prioritizing investment in beginning farmers, BIPOC farmers, LGBTQ farmers, so that our food and farming system looks radically different than it does today. But we've got those policy solutions, and you know what this is? I saw a couple questions about the Farm Bill. The Farm Systems Reform Act is a perfect example of things that should be in the Farm Bill, as opposed to using money for the EQIP program, Environmental Quality Incentive Program, that was designed to help farmers implement conservation and environmental practices, that's been diverted to fund factory farms now. You can get this EQIP funding to build a manure pit, right? That's considered an environmental protection. We know that's crazy, but that's what's happened, right? So again, the policy solutions are there. What I'm going to ask you real quick to do is type in the chat, what is one way that you're either connected to a farm or to the food system right now? Maybe you're a member of a farmer organization. Maybe you're a member of a community organization. Maybe you're a worker who's in the food chain. Just type that in the chat real quick, because I'm going to come back to it in just a second. There are lots of things that we can do. And first and foremost, personal choices do matter, right? And so, again, I think I saw somebody else in the chat talking about this, but what you get at the grocery store, you know, and like Noah was saying, it's hard to find that healthy food that can be affordable. ASPCA has a tool for you. ASPCA.org/detox will help you identify, help you detox from factory farm products. Getting involved with an organization, join an organization in your community, in your state, in your area that is working on these issues. It's absolutely imperative that we build the movement. Like Sean was saying, we need more of us involved and more of us taking on leadership roles. We have to build broadly and deeply. And again, going back to the definition of organizing that Sean laid out and talking with Noah about farmers, is the folks that are most impacted need to be driving this work. And so join organizations, support those that are most impacted. So it doesn't matter, regardless of race, regardless of zip code, regardless of gender or where you came from, this system impacts each and every one of us. And so the things that you've been typing in the chat, how you identify, how you connect to this food system, you can use that. That is one of the most easy things for you to do. Use your personal experience with how you connect to the food and farm system to talk to others in your community. That is the number one way. And as you get more involved with organizations in your community, in your state, or at the national level, you can bring them along with you to be engaged. And then the next thing you might end up as part of HEAL's School of Political Leadership, right? To help take this fight to the next level. There's lots of ways to get involved, lots of ways to re-envision it. It's just up to us to take that first step.
Thank you for that inspiring bit on how we can all really do something to change the pathways of phasing out CAFOs. So I have a open question for all of you, Sean, Noah, and Adam. So this vision demands people power and frontline community leadership. What could it look like for the rest of us to get behind the leadership group of yours, leadership groups like yours?
Nobody's going to come off mute and go first. I'll do it, and then just because. So I think, again, that's where I was ending. So I'm asking folks to get involved, and whether that's hopefully it's with the ASPCA, hopefully it's with HEAL or a HEAL member organization. I know LSP is a HEAL organization, Saffron is too. So I think like some of those ways, again, the power on policy, like I said, we know the policies are there. One of the materials that will be included in the follow-up is going to be a Food Systems Reform Act petition that can help you contact your legislator. Again, that's just a simple click, but it does have a meaningful impact to let people know. I think if there's other resources or ways to get involved there, jump at those. I mentioned a couple, but I think again, for us, it's really about following the leadership of folks who are most impacted by this. And those are going to be most directly in the food and farm system. So that, I guess that would be my encouragement, is to look for those kinds of organizations in your community and follow their lead. and listen. That's where I wanted to land, was like, I learned, and I've been doing this work for a long time. I learned a lot today just by listening, and I want to continue to listen. I saw a lot of folks saying that they are family farmers in the chat there. I was like, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you about what you need to make your farm more resilient, to make your farm more viable, so that we have more farmers who are raising animals the right way.
Great.
I'll add something. I'll leave you some time to know. I just, reiterate kind of what I mean, it all starts with the relationships, right? Building relationships and building trust. And the problem is big enough that there's a role for everybody in this movement. But that role is going to be a little different. I'm also not a farmer. And right now I don't live in a rural community. I don't know as much about how to reach out to people in a particular community as the people in that community do, right? So I play a different role. So, but it all starts with building relationships, and then we can understand how the way that I'm impacted connects to the way that you're impacted, and how what our shared vision, where does our vision align? What are the things we're all fighting for together?
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Adam and John. I don't really know that I could enrich what was said already, but I really like what you said, Sean, about the problem is big enough that there's a role for everybody. I really resonate with that. I think that I don't really, like, for me personally, my role, I'm not going to, I had a short little policy stint in Capitol Hill. I realized that, like, that's not really my role. That's not what I want to do. But I think what Adam was saying, I think is actually, I learned that it's actually very impactful for constituents to contact their congressional representatives, especially very, very large numbers of them doing so. So I think that is actually a really important strategy for someone who isn't necessarily like connected to a community or connected to like farm organizations immediately, like off the jump. I think that's like one of the first things that can happen. And then I think also that the movement of capital, of money, needs to occur. That is like extremely important, because the way that I would think of it is like these corporate farms are essentially just giant clogs of capital, of money, and capital is this strange being that is this value that is taken from the time of people's lives, and it's taken from the lives of animals, basically, and it's this value, and it's there, and it needs to be redistributed in order to enliven and create an alternative agricultural economy that is based on humane and regenerative management and relationship, ultimately, with the land and with animals. So I think that would be what I would say.
Great. Thank you all. That was such an awesome conversation. Learning from all of you and the work that you're doing, and just how our visions connect. And thank you for sharing this out with everyone here. We're going to move on. So I think we're now going to move on to a Q&A from all of you. So we've been collecting some of your questions that are in the chat. And so we're going to share them out to our speakers right now. The first one that we got here is, and this can go to anyone who wants to answer and feels like fit to answer this question, because it isn't specific for anyone. So is there any organizing around CAFOs and the Farm Bill? And is the Farm Bill a place where things can be changed? And I saw a lot of discussion around the Farm Bill in the chat, and I see, Sean, that you're laughing. So if you got some thoughts, go right ahead.
I was laughing at whether the Farm Bill can be changed. Yeah, I mean, we believe it can be changed. It's a big, so if folks, probably most folks are familiar with the Farm Bill, but if you're not, it's every couple of years, and it's like the whole economy. of our farming system. So it's all the programs that we create to support farmers. It's a lot of money is flowing through there, and there are just tons and tons of corporate lobbyists trying to influence the farm bill. It also provides hunger benefits for Americans too. So there are definitely pieces within the farm bill that are propping up consolidation in our farming system, and then are actually directly giving money to factory farms and subsidizing them. And I believe Adam mentioned one of the programs, EQIP, EQUIP, which is intended to do environmental protection work, but a huge chunk of the money is going to factory farms to run their the huge gallons of manure. The other place where we can try to break down factory farms is the corporate consolidation, and giving small and mid-sized farmers more resources to take on the monopolistic and anti-competitive system that we have. So there's definitely some pieces in there. It's a really big and complicated piece of legislation with a lot of corporate lobbyists, so it's definitely hard to change.
I'm going to borrow Noah's framework, because I think exactly like Sean's saying, attacking some of those props in the farm bill, like being strategic about it, right? Kind of recognizing that given this political climate, it's not likely to have a complete overhaul of the farm bill. But again, being strategic and coming together as a movement to figure out which of those props are we targeting, and really working on and amplifying with our supporters and members, so that elected officials are hearing lots and lots and lots of voices saying the same things. I think that's critical. I think we see emerging technology from the industry, things like manure digesters, which are used to justify factory farms, saying that, oh, we can make factory farms green by capping the gas. Well, no, those methane digesters are inefficient. They want government money to pay for it. And you still have a boatload of toxic water that's going to be applied to farm fields. So it's just a false solution. We can stop more government money in the farm bill from going to that. Then we also need to invest in that transition. So beginning farmer programs that support the kinds of farm programs that Noah was talking about. We need to amplify our voices around those kinds of programs. And then I would say the second prong that I would focus on is fighting that cultural aspect of the farm bill that Sean mentioned earlier, in that realm of power, right? Is that there's a culture about how we talk about the farm bill. And if we can start talking about the farm bill in a way that's rooted in our values and what we believe our food and farm system should look like, and how the farm bill dictates that, I think over the long haul, that's going to help us advance bigger and bigger steps. So thinking about it in more of a cultural and again, I wrote it down. Well, Noah was talking in the beginning of like healthy, affordable food, and like that being a value for us in prioritizing that.
All right.
Yeah, I oh no.
No, I was gonna say anything.
I didn't really have.
You're good.
Oh, not really, to be honest. I think y'all really covered it. Not really my area of expertise, but I really think we organize to shut the hose off of all that money going into those operations, I think is important, and then rerouting that water. That's it.
Great, thank you. So we have a specific question for Adam that was in the chat. So how do the conversations transitioning farmers out of CAFOs go? So like, are these one-on-one conversations, and how receptive are CAFOs operators to that? Or is this more of a policy-based actions?
Yeah, well, at the ASPCA, it's happening in a number of ways. And then I want to touch on a couple other organizations too that I know are doing it. So, at the ASPCA, it's both through grants that we're offering, and then through organizations that we work with that are investing in farmer mentorship programs, so that more farmers are operating more humane farms, and they're opting into welfare certification programs, things like that, to kind of help incentivize or defray the costs, right? Because that's an investment in your operation. It can be expensive, and like Noah said, is like it can feel trapping to be stuck in that debt of trying to raise healthy food that's raised in a more humane way. I think what's really impressive to me is the number of organizations that are out there. LSP is one of them, that has a great beginning farmer program and climate farmer programs. I know there's folks from MRCC on the call today who actually run a marketing arm of their organization to get pork out to more people. So there's, I think from my experience, when you go out and talk to farmers, they don't want to be, most of them do not want to be operating factory farms. They know that other community members don't like it. There's organizations like RAFI who organize farmers who have CAFOs that are stuck in unfair contracts, right? They are trapped in these unfair contracts. So it's kind of finding the entry point with every farmer that we can and trying to move them along the path towards more humane and more sustainable regenerative farming operations. And also, Sean mentioned the loss of farmers. We know that we're going to need more farmers. And so it's incentivizing a new generation of farmers, like I said, that's going to be different than what I grew up with, which was a bunch of old white guys. It's going to look a lot different. It needs to look a lot different, right? So that it is more racially diverse, it's more gender diverse, and it's more representative of our society.
Great. Thank you. We have the next question we have is about sustainable animal agriculture. And I feel like this is one of the big myths that kind of hit around, regional food economies, but how can animal farms be sustainable with the amount of meat that is perpetuated and eaten every year in the US and around the world? Is there a realistic, sustainable, regenerative model without the use of wide swaths of land to raise the animals humanely?
I can be first on that one. I'll come at it from this angle. I really appreciate the question. I think it's a very important question. For me, I think about values and also behaviors of people. And I think that the unbridled consumption of food and of life is a value that has been instilled in our society for generation after generation after generation, that we can have anything we want, we can have any amount of it that we want, and we should be able to have as much of it as we want, instead of recognizing that we live in a finite world that we share with other beings who also need to live here and have families here, like I'm talking about animals and plants and fish and all other living beings. And that, to me, that's how I would approach that question. I wouldn't necessarily say that, so like, sure, I think that I'm not really the expert to say there's too many beef cattle in the United States. Like, I will leave that for somebody else who can talk more about that. But that's how I would answer that question, is about values and worldview.
Thank you.
Just tack on real quick too, because it is a logistical question. Like right now, 50% of the corn cropland in the U.S. and 70% of the soy cropland in the US is raising those two crops to pump feed into factory farms, right? So imagine this system, like if we don't have to raise all of that, all of those grains just to feed factory farms, that gives us a lot more land for, again, beginning farmers raising those animals in a more humane way out on pasture. In a way that is regenerative to our soil and to our water. But at the end of the day, I agree, Noah, we don't need to eat 70 pounds of bacon every year. It's like, I do not need that much bacon. Trust me. It's like, it's not good for me, right? The other thing is just the amount of these farm animals that we raise in this country for export. And Noah, I'm going back to what you said about Via Campesina and looking to farmer and worker movements internationally, is there's this assumption, right? That in industrial ag loves to say it, is that we can feed the world. It's like, that's not our job. That does not have to be our job. There are folks in all over the globe who have been farming for generations, for centuries, since we were humans, right? And it is not our job. That is a myth that the industry tells to prop up this system that's rooted in the patriarchy, that's rooted in white supremacy, and it says we know how to do it better. But the reality is we know this system is not better. So we don't need to raise as much meat as we do, as many farm animals as we do.
Yeah, it's like we kind of have to ask ourselves the question of like, is it possible to create another system that would actually work? But when we do that, we're also sometimes forgetting that the system we have right now doesn't actually make sense. And it's not a system that just occurred naturally. It's a system that people created, that white men created, right? Like you think about Iowa, right? You just drive around Iowa, all you see is farmland, right? Everywhere. But if you go to the grocery store, how much of your food is actually coming from Iowa? Basically none of it, right? Because it's all corn. And that, right? So that system doesn't make sense. Like it's not logical. It's not a system that has to be. Well, we've created that system, right? And then when you think about, just go back to some of the basics, right? If you have a couple of cows, small amount of cows on the land, what their manure, their waste becomes fertilizer, right? And that goes back into your ground. That, you know, but when you have thousands of cows on a small area of land, that amount of waste cannot go back into the land. And so again, we've actually created a system that does not work and does not make sense. And so it is, like we have to remind ourselves that it is absolutely possible to have a different system that will get us to what we actually want. Like you were saying, Noah, what are the values that actually are important to us, that are shared by most of us? That is possible.
Great. Thank you all for answering that question. So the fourth question that we have from the chat is, as we hear more about this issue, we're hearing a lot about solutions like factory farming gas. What are some other false solutions we should look out for?
I just because we some of us like live and breathe this stuff, right? I'm seeing more and more messaging from the industry about carbon neutral chickens or carbon neutral beef, where they're trying to justify raising farm animals inside factory farms by offsets. Factory farm gas is a perfect example, but you know, they will often point to the fact that they can raise so many more animals in such a smaller space. Again, we see that as part of the problem, but the industry is trying to tout that as a kind of a false solution. So I think it's, you know, it's kind of usually trying to give it the sniff test, for lack of a better word, and really trying to get to the bottom of what we see some of those industry claims, but that can be tough. That can be tough.
Yeah, I would just say, yeah, just to piggyback on what you said, Adam, just like any solution that's not fundamentally changing the production system. And I think like that example you named is a good example of that, but like literally just anything. And I think it's very difficult to identify what these things are, because that's what the whole marketing arm of the corporations like is designed to do, is to obscure these things. But yeah, I think that like anything that does not fundamentally change the production cycle is just not, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I think, you know, factory farm gas and kind of creating energy out of these CAFO systems to solve the climate change problem that we've also created is definitely a false solution. You know, but it goes back to just this philosophy of whether we can create a different system or not. Adam mentioned Earl Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture from 30, 40 years ago. the more recent Secretary of Agriculture said the same thing. Sonny Perdue, appointed by President Trump, Secretary of Agriculture, said in America, the big get bigger and the small go out. Big get bigger and the small go out. And he wasn't saying that was a problem. He was saying that's the way it works. And if that's the philosophy that we are going to create our society around, then that is broken. And that's the sort of false paradigm that I think we're working in, that we then create solutions where we're taking gas from a CAFO system to mitigate climate change, which can also be solved in a much different way.
Thanks, y'all. So we have one last question that we're going to take from the chat, which is, what are some important strategies for policymakers, advocates, and others looking to encourage dietary change that comes along with moving from factories to farms?
The question was, what were some strategies for eaters in their lifestyles and what they choose? Is that right?
For policymakers, advocates, and others looking to encourage dietary change that comes along with moving from factories to farms.
Well, I'll just say one quick and simple thing, which is try to connect with some farmers in your community, whether that's at a farmer's market or through a CSA. And there's a lot of public policies that will support farmers markets, support CSAs. But if you're trying to think about dietary change and what you're eating, get to know where your food's coming from. It might be hard if that's not the system that we're used to in our grocery stores, but it's not that hard. If you just go to a farmer's market and talk to somebody, or look for a CSA to join, that can be a really good, and there's a lot of public policy that will support those systems, food systems. There's a ton of it, but that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Sean. I would say, like, in addition to doing that, to talk to the people who are trying to get their food from those farmers, and like, what are the things that they ultimately want and need and are trying to do. Because for me, I'm just always very hesitant about uninformed, centralized policymaking. But I think that actually getting an understanding of, like, the lives of the people who want to eat differently, or who want to be able to have a more healthy diet for themselves and their family and stuff, and that, the bottom line is that personal choice is not number one with that. It's about economics, and it's about the wages that people are paid. And it's about the time that people have in their lives. And I think that being able to talk to like actual, to talk to people, especially working class people who are interested in purchasing local foods and supporting local farmers, to craft the policies to make their lives easier and make them be able to do what they want to do. So
the only other thing I'll add, because they covered it so well, is think big picture, think holistically. Is like, this food and farm system, as we've already covered so many times, touches us all in so many ways that, like, there's lots of ways to help policymakers think about this too. So if you're meeting with a policymaker and they say, well, we've got a good food purchasing program in our community, or at the city council, or at the community school district, or what have you, that's great. We need more of that. But maybe, like, what we found, just as a quick example, is in the state of New York, the good food purchasing policy there is limited by state. The state is required to automatically go with the lowest bidder. By striking that requirement that you automatically choose the lowest bidder, the institutional buyers can now weigh considerations about the producers that they're buying from, and how they raise their farm animals, and the practices that they're using. So sometimes it may seem like an end around, but there's lots of different bites at the apple, so to speak. So just stay creative, build those relationships, and keep organizing.
Thank you all. So that was our last question, and I appreciate your time and all the insight you just shared with us. I'm going to pass it to Zena to talk a little bit about actions people can take on this issue.
Thank you, Marlene, and thank you all for those amazing questions, and to the speakers for addressing some of that with such clarity and grace. Shout out also to Malika for organizing the questions. Thanks, Malika. So this is a space for co-learning and cross-pollination. So we encourage you all to connect with each other, connect with our speakers, with HEAL, if you feel like you need to, and if you want to learn more. If you're feeling inspired to take action right away, Adam mentioned that ASPCA is inviting folks to support the Farm Systems Reform Act. We'll be sharing links with with you all. Also check out the LSP and SAFON websites to learn about their campaigns, how you can take action, and how you can support farmers who are out there proving that it is possible to do this right. Someone mentioned, maybe it was Adam, that we have to build broadly and deeply and let the most impacted folks drive this work. So we encourage you to find meaningful ways to support these orgs, but also farmers and workers and organizations within your own ecosystems, and find meaningful ways to get involved in their work. And lastly, we want to direct you to our platform toolkit, which is a collection of resources on factory farming. It includes a great interview with Sean and Matthew from LSP. I think Matthew is here on the webinar as well. It includes an explainer series that gives you a quick breakdown of the issue of factory farming, including some of the things that were discussed today. It's got a resource list with great material from these folks that are present here today, but also from folks like Public Justice, Food and Water Watch, who all have done really critical work in this issue area. And it's also got ways that you can get involved and a list of organizations that you can support. Again, thank you all so much for being here. And with that, I will pass it back to Marlene.
What a good time, y'all. I learned a lot. It was great to connect with every single one of you. And it was, honestly, I was amazed at how many farmers and really cool people were in this space. And I want to know you all. So thank you for spending time during your day with us, this hour and a half. That concludes our presentation. And we just hope that you join the next webinar that we have and share out the recording that we will provide with you with anyone in your community that, might learn and benefit from this. So with that, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. And we will be sending out an email with links and resources and the recording, so you won't miss out.